Hello and welcome to this edition of Upfront. I'm your host, Nancy Wilmot. And yes, we do look a little bit different. That's because just like many of you, I'm working from home. And you have to admit, it's a little bit odd. In fact, the whole COVID-19 situation is a little bit odd. It throws us all off, certainly puts more stress on all of us, and more stress on couples. And for some couples, during this time of social isolation, that stress can be dangerous, which is why I'm so delighted to introduce our guest today, a woman who can speak to those dangers, Ellen Frood of the Alberni Community and Women's Services. Ellen, welcome to Upfront.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much. I'm pleased to join you today.
And Ellen, is it my imagination, or are these stresses really adding to the dangers that some vulnerable women face in their relationships?
I think that even in my own life with my partner of many years, whom I love deeply, it's stressful. We have the silliest little thing that can cause the friction between us right about now. And it's stress that adds and adds and adds. Every week that goes on, it's a little bit longer, and the stress becomes that much greater for all of us.
And is that extra stress resulting in more violence?
Yeah, we know, Nancy, that domestic violence is on the rise. I think around the middle of April, there were 3 women reported killed by their partners, seemingly, due to domestic violence. Yesterday, that number had risen to 9. So again, we have women living in a relationship, so their home, their husbands are there, or partners are there, their children are there, and nobody can leave the house, and the stress is extraordinary, and the danger rises for women in those circumstances.
Wow, those statistics are so frightening. Now, they are Canada-wide. They're not just in Port Alberni, of course, but that makes them no less horrifying. And it seems to me that social isolation would be a component of violence against women in the home at the best of times.
It does. It's almost like creating the perfect storm. So, isolating a woman in the home is part of what happens in domestic violence. And now we have a medical officer that's telling everybody to stay home. So the abuser is not having to worry about trying to isolate, because that's taken care of right now.
Wow. Now, you and I, Alan, were talking a little bit before the show, and you shared with me a couple of signals that women can and should and are using to signal to people that they're in danger when they can't speak. Can you share those signals with our audience?
Yeah, you bet. So one of them is a pretty simple thing. It's if you're talking on the phone with somebody, or if somebody calls you and says, I need some new eyeliner. Pretty simple question, and it just is a cue to say, I need help. So very simply, if you know somebody who's in an abusive relationship, you can set that up and say, if there's a problem and you need help, give me a call. Tell me that you need eyeliner, and I will call 911 or have somebody come and assist. So that's a simple one. The second one is creating a sign with your palm up to the camera, tuck your thumb in, and close your fingers over. That's it. Yeah, and close your fingers over. So if you're in a video conference with somebody, and that's all you have to do is very simply hold your hand up, tuck your thumb in, and close your fingers or trap your thumb underneath, and that would be a signal that you're needing assistance. In that case, 911, call for assistance immediately.
And these are signals that a woman would use when she can't speak. When she can't say, I need help, she would make this symbol, the closed thumb fist, or she would call for eyeliner. Am I correct? So you don't respond and say, hey, do you need help? You just respond and call for help immediately.
That's correct. You can continue with the call, end the call, and then take action.
Now, it's interesting that this is a signal that you talked about specifically using during video conferencing, which so many of us are doing right now. But it strikes me that this could also be used in other situations. For instance, if you're working at a drive-through at a restaurant and you see a woman in the car who's not speaking, there's maybe a man speaking for her, she's saying something else, but she makes this signal, I'm guessing that's something you should respond to.
It is, Nancy. Probably a little bit more difficult because drive-ins typically go pretty quickly. But, if somebody's really, observant, they may be able to take a license plate number or something. That is much more difficult to do. However, it certainly is a signal to say that I see a problem. Yeah.
And talking about how you're working with people today in this new COVID-19 world, I believe ACAUSE has a new number that you've put into use, a text number that women can text without sending a message, just text the number to get help.
Yeah, as part of our services, our transition house is open 24/7. And so we answer that phone 24/7. But we added a text number just recently, 250-206 1011, so 1011. And, not thinking, that, why would we not have done this earlier? So, again, in the scenario of somebody in a house with a partner or an abuser, not able to make a telephone call for help or to be overheard, they now have the ability to text. And so this is a whole new added service that we have, which really is wonderful. We're really pleased to make that offer available.
Oh, such a valuable service. But I want to point out, we're talking about the most dire situations where a woman is in immediate danger, she needs intervention immediately. What about that situation where perhaps you have neighbors living across the road and you know they're under extra stress, you've been a little bit concerned about them in the past, but you really have no evidence that there is any violence happening in that home, but you just want to help. How do you help?
Well, I mean, as part of safety planning with women, what we do is we build into that things that they might do. So that could be connecting with a neighbor to keep personal papers, important papers, and to even have that telephone call that might be some kind of signal that you need assistance, to be there and to be able to answer. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a tough one, but because as a neighbor, if you realize abuse is taking place, unless somebody's asking you to help, it's a really hard one.
It is in such a difficult situation to find your way through, but it is a situation that you and everybody at Alberni Community and Women's Services deals with on a daily basis. You work with women at all sorts of stages of both their vulnerability and their strengths.
Yeah, of vulnerability and our strength, absolutely. I mean, we like to say that we take people from surviving to thriving through some of the work that we do. But I mean, there are many forms of abuse. It's not just, we all know about physical abuse, right? That's the one that everybody thinks of. But there are ways of abuse, financial abuse, withholding funding for the woman and everybody else in the house is that. Hurting pets is a form of abuse. Psychologically hurting people through words or what you do, how you treat them. I won't say some of the words or some of the things, but there's some pretty nasty things, right? Um, Pets. Okay, I heard once about flushing a kid's goldfish down the toilet. Now look at the eyes. Look at the look at your face. Oh, your heart, right? And guess what? That's abuse. That's hurting a child. That's a way of getting to a partner and hurting a child by hurting pets and animals in the house. So financial abuse, emotional. There's a whole range of things that become part of the spectrum of abuse. So it's not always just physical.
No, it's not always physical. But I have to say, I mean, we're talking about this time of social isolation. Well, you and your staff are socially isolating. You're working safely as well. How on earth do you provide these kind of support services during this time?
Yes. Well, we are now in telephone contact with people. In some cases, we text. In some cases, we use Messenger or video conferencing, whatever is deemed to be safe by the woman. And of course, we have to be cautious about privacy. But we've become very innovative in how we work with people. And we started almost immediately after the shutdown, I guess you want to call it, of contacting our clients saying we were still doing work, we're still available, and we're right there for them if they need any assistance. And also letting them know that the transition house is open if they need that kind of service.
But there's even an added layer, Ellen. What if there is a woman who has made the decision to flee her home? She's taking her children with her. Perhaps she has underlying medical issues, and she is legitimately really worried about contracting COVID. How on earth do you serve her needs?
So I think everybody's afraid of contracting COVID-19 right about now. So that's not unique to, but, and I think that people are very cautious about where they go. And of course, our transition house is a shared living, it's communal living. So, somebody might be a little bit concerned about moving into that kind of environment, but we've taken steps. So if there is a concern, we've taken steps to make sure that women can live within rooms and spaces and separate themselves. And we've got all the personal protective PPE and sanitizing, all those things. But we're totally prepared to help somebody who has that kind of concern. And if absolutely necessary. If there is a concern, even that somebody does have COVID-19 and is needs to be isolated, we do have through BC Housing the possibility of putting somebody into a hotel room or a motel room here in town. So, we do have options through our service providers.
That's just an extraordinary level of service. I had no idea you were able to offer that. And it strikes me when you're telling me stories like this that as valuable as your services are to the community all the time, that there may be even more valuable right now.
Yeah, I do. Having a voice and somebody to speak with is critically important. And when I talk about how we're speaking with people, I'm also referring to people that would have come into our drop-in center, which is now closed. And that was part of their life. They came to access a computer. They came to access a telephone to make telephone calls, the washroom services, coffee, friendship, almost like a family. So there's great loss, and I would even call it a certain amount of grieving that's taking place, and for all of us, by the way. But that kind of loss of service. So being able to reach out to that group of people is also a really important piece of what we're doing. So it's not just counseling that we're doing. We're still doing outreach. We're still helping people complete forms for income and assistance. We're still doing all of our victim services work. The charges are still happening through the courts, and we're receiving referrals from the RCMP to our community-based victim services person, who in turn is making contact with those individuals to make sure that they're being served and understand the judicial process.
And that leads me into a fairly personal question for you, Ellen. What are you most worried about? I mean, we're at a time of great change. Some of the restrictions are loosening up. What do you worry most about for the community that you serve?
Wow. I think that I think I mentioned grieving, but what I hear now is that the stress is building, and it is each week that goes on, it becomes deeper and deeper, and so the post traumatic stress, I think we're going to starting to see a lot of that. And when you speak about the community, I really speak about the community in general, because within my own staff, I hear fears and concerns about when we return to work. What's it going to look like? Are we going to wear masks? How do we bring clients into the building? How do we continue to do the great work that we do, right? And so, yeah, I don't stress, and that's going to be really hard for people to put aside, because we're looking at a long time here, not a short time.
Yeah. And even though, as we said earlier, some of the restrictions are loosening up a bit, that doesn't mean that there are no restrictions, that there are no guidelines to follow. And in some ways, that adds to the level of uncertainty, I'm sure.
But I mean, we, like many other people in the community, are putting in glass enclosures around desks, and and it feels odd because it feels very impersonal. You know what it's like when you walk up to a window. How does it feel versus seeing a person? Me too. Like, I go in and I hang over the front counter and talk to our admin person. I can't do that anymore. That's a loss for me. How silly does that sound, right? But people want to come and talk. They want to be heard, and not to be trying to, are you hearing me through the glass kind of thing.
So many changes, Ellen. I mean, I can't imagine what the world is going to look like going forward. And you mentioned something interesting earlier when you were talking about the text number. You said, can't imagine why we didn't do this earlier. Are there other changes that you've been forced to make during this COVID-19 time that you might just keep in place when it's all over?
The text number for sure, obviously, but we're also putting things in place now for the future, and so we're putting in more technology. We're putting screens in meeting spaces where we can have meetings with people from a distance, and connect back and forth from site to site, and we've increased the ability to work. For people to work from home and to be safe if they have any particular challenges that they might be a little bit more high risk. So certainly, technologically we are improving what we're doing, and this is certainly something for the future and something that we will carry forward.
We can't talk about the future, though, Ellen, without talking about the actual future of ACAUS, because like every nonprofit in town, I'm sure the Alberni Community and Women's Services is wondering how they're going to get through all of this financially. It's not easy for any of the groups, and I'm sure it's not easy for you.
For sure. So to start off, and what a wonderful opportunity, but I just had a phone call from the community foundation here in town, and there was some federal money that flowed out to all of the community foundations, and we're actually receiving $2,000 from them. I just had that notice today. Wow. But you bring up a really, really good point. So we approximately 80% of our funding comes from government sources, different sources of revenue, and which means that over the course of every year we need to raise money, and that remaining 20% is where, so we are going to be at a loss. Our main event is a walk called Coldest Night of the Year, and if we can't do that in February, then we're losing about $30,000 of the money that we would have raised otherwise from the community. So I actually don't really speak just for myself. I speak for all the nonprofits who are unable to hold events at this particular time, and we haven't heard anything from the government. They're supporting business and lots of people, but they're not talking to the nonprofits about how we can help you continue the work that you do. And I fear that some will have to close their doors.
And you didn't mention gaming funds specifically, but I know that many, if not all of the nonprofits in this community rely on gaming funds when they're making up their budgets.
That's right. And in particular, our drop-in center is funded by gaming funds. And we have been for, I think, 11 years now, been receiving funding from gaming to keep that center open. And with the news now that it's going to be a long time before we see casinos opening again, that impact on the revenue coming to the community creates great uncertainty for us and potential program loss. We're going to do everything we can to continue to deliver service. But if you don't have funding, you have to take a look at where you go next.
Boy, I can't even imagine where you would begin to cut, Ellen, because all of your services are so valuable. It would be heartbreaking to have to start cutting away at that budget. And because they're so valuable, we haven't told people how to get in contact with ACOS. How do people reach you?
Well, we continue to have our regular telephone number available, the 250-724-7111, and that will connect you through to any one of the counselors, whether it's the Peace Counselor for kids who witness abuse, for our Stop the Violence counseling, for community victim services, for the Stop the Violence outreach. All of those programs continue. And all you have to do is just leave your name and number for those services, and they'll call you back, and they'll call you back really quickly. Obviously, Transition House number is 24/7, and so that's served. So it is very easy to contact. And even if somebody called our Transition House looking for another service that's not provided through housing, they would definitely make sure that the contact information is passed on.
And although I know you're not recruiting volunteers at this time, it's not a great time to ask volunteers to come out, ACOS does make use of volunteers in several different capacities, I believe, don't you?
We do. We have lots of volunteers helping us through our drop-in center. Up until this, we had, and bringing in doing crafts and sewing and knitting and drum circles and making drums, and you name it. There's a whole range of reasons and ways that volunteers come. They've done gardening for us at our Transition House and painting in different centers. Our whole upstairs of the building was painted using help from RBC. So we use them in a very varied ways. Yes, for sure. So we're missing them very much, yeah.
And I'm sure they're missing you too, Ellen, because you talked earlier about your staff grieving, your staff feeling such a sense of loss and missing the folks that would come into the drop-in center. And really, you've created a community there, a community that is, just like every other community, physically distanced. It must be a loss for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. And again, when I say grieving, I think that all of us are grieving. We've lost something in our lives. We've lost that connection. When you talk about the social isolation, is really physically isolating yourself from people that you know. But yes, the staff are missing clients very much. They're missing the interactions that they have. We're missing laughter. We're missing knowing that we're helping to affect change and make a difference in people's lives, helping them understand perhaps that the abuse isn't their fault, that we're the first ones saying, wow, did you know that's abuse? Did you know that? Wow. No, they didn't know it. And we're telling them, it's not your fault. And that's a pretty important thing to be able to say to somebody, isn't it? So yeah, that is tough for us right now.
Oh, I can't even imagine how tough it would be to be distanced from folks that you're supporting and not be able to just sit beside them and pat them on the shoulder. I'm guessing it also has to be pretty tough to sit through a city council meeting like one we had not long ago, where the RCMP delivered statistics on just how bad the situation is becoming. Do you have those statistics handy? I think you do.
I do, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So for the first quarter, so January to March, I'm just going to look down, the number of domestic violence reports were 43. That's in the first quarter of this year. In the first quarter of last year, that number was 30. So that's about a 30% increase. The number of sex offenses in that same period was 12. And in the first quarter of last year, the number was 6. And actually, in the first quarter, going right back to 2016, those numbers were 6. So that's a 50% increase. What we know is that domestic violence is being underreported at this particular time. So again, many women are choosing to stay in the home and not come out. Again, it's just this perfect storm for them. They're unable to. But so that's a very dramatic increase. And I certainly recognize that that's not all during the COVID period, but most certainly February through the month of March, we're seeing that. And I think that our community-based victim services person is receiving at least one referral a day coming through from our CMP at this point. So the numbers are climbing, and it's really scary.
It is really scary, and in light of that, Ellen, I'm going to ask you once again to remind our viewers of those signals that a woman can use if she's unable to speak and ask for help.
Okay, so hold your hand up and your palm up to the screen, tuck your thumb in, and just wrap your fingers around your thumb. And that is the signal that if you're in a video conference with somebody to say, I need help. So, it's kind of like me, I'll do this or I'll do that or whatever it is, but you can just sort of calmly do that. It's easy enough to do. Innocent kind of gesture, and that's simple enough. And of course, there's make a phone call and say, I'm needing some eyeliner.
And if you see those signals, if you receive that phone call, what do you do?
Call 911.
Call 911.
Call 911. Don't rush across the street to help. I don't believe that, you want to maintain your safety as well. Again, I think sadly of what happened in Nova Scotia. And when I first heard about this massacre and what was happening, I wondered, was the root of this domestic violence? And in fact, it was. And so, from that, were people coming to help were actually killed. So please remember, you must maintain your own safety as well.
Keep yourself safe. Help keep our community safe. Ellen, thank you so much for coming in today and talking about this. It's been so valuable. I know I've learned a lot.
Thanks, Nancy. It's great talking with you. And don't forget that text number is 250-206-1011.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Take care. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Upfront. We may look a little bit different, but hopefully we're still delivering information that's valuable and that you can use out there in the community. Until next time, I'm Nancy Wilmot for Upfront on Shaw Spotlight.